All right, you heard the tink, and we are live. If you hear babies in the background, no worries. This is real life. So my name is Imuna Yisrael. This is Solonomics 101 extension, the LEV Project, Lift Every Voice. And we are reading from, as I was just talking to Sister Angel on the phone, Sister Malaka on the phone, that it's getting interesting. After tonight, we will be halfway through. We will halfway through reading our first narrative, and we'll go on to another one. But this one so far is just so interesting, and I am so interested to know what happens next. We're on chapter 10. I believe it's 20 chapters in this text, and so after tonight, we are halfway through. Oh, I'm sorry. Bear with me 1 minute. I forgot to share this thing here. So much. Again, for all those volunteers out there, I know you're just waiting in the wings to volunteer, and we're definitely waiting for you to volunteer to read until such time I'm here. So just bear with me, and I thank all those who have volunteered thus far, and all of those. It seems that we have quite a few people who catch it on the rerun, and that's a blessing. As well as don't feel free to comment. Feel free to share your thoughts and ideas. I know it's kind of heavy information, but once we work through it, oopsie. 1 second. Let me share this thing on social media. 1 second. And then I have a surprise before I actually get started. See, I always say never underestimate the power of one. The power that we serve is one. And when we tap into the true and living universal power of creation, we can do big things. The Creator will open doors for us. So for those who have been dreaming, who have been, what's the word I'm looking for? Tuning in to the LEV Project since it started, it is not in vain. And here's the surprise. We made here in Florida. This is the Florida Today, and on the front of the cover, I don't know if you can see it, I put the link in the description box. So this is when we broadcasted live from, what was that, last Thursday? When we broadcasted live from Miss Michelle's bookstore, Essence of Knowledge Urban Bookstore. So we made the front cover. I didn't tell everybody at the time, but the newspaper was there, and they were taking pictures, and they wrote us up from dream to meme. So basically, one of the editors here, I had sent some information to him. Shy, you're in the shot. January 18th, she says. That was one of the babies, just like, hey. What else I was gonna say? One of the editors, one of the reporters, he wanted to do something because today is Remembering Day of Martin Luther King and things of this nature. So he wanted me to make some commentary. And in the commentary this is us doing the LEV Project. There goes the computer. We're live streaming. There's 50 years in chains. And so all praise be to the Most High, the Holy One, that, oh, wow, I didn't see this second part of the picture here. See that? I picked this up from the supermarket today, but I didn't see, oh, this picture is nice here. These are the little ones that you usually hear in the back. So there we go. And then we made front page. So the LEV Project is doing things. And for those who are here because we really want to be here and we want to learn and grow and heal, it is totally a blessing. And I told them about it, and so they printed it up. So once again, hallelujah, praise be to the Most High. I think that's an interesting and beautiful thing. So now when that's out of the way, and you can definitely, I put the link there so you can take a look at the link so that you can read the whole article. Again, if you have anything to say from yesterday, catching us up from yesterday, he was set up, he was framed. If you didn't hear it, you can go back and listen. He was framed yesterday. He almost lost his life. They were going to skin him because two other men, two mulattoes, they accused him of doing something to a European, same old story. And before they actually looked at what was really going on, they automatically tried to pin it on him. And he almost lost his life. But you have to kind of tune in to yesterday's show if you missed it to find out, because it was really drama packed. I would be doing it an injustice if I tried to summarize all the stuff that popped off in chapter 9. It was a long chapter, but definitely it was a good chapter. So I'm gonna go back off the camera now. As you can see, I'm a little bit tired, but I'm in here, and I'm going to be reading chapter 10. So once again, congratulations to all who have been and saw the vision and continue to see and see the value. And prayerfully, you could take it to your communities, pass it along. It's a book club out loud, you know. It's not only just the discussion, but it's the actual reading together. So, you know, take it and spread it, and may we all find some kind of level of healing in it. So at this point, we're going to get started. Thank you once again. All right, chapter 10. It says, I have before observed that the Negroes of the cotton plantations are exceedingly superstitious, and they are indeed prone, beyond all other people that I have ever known, to believe in ghosts and the existence of an infinite number of supernatural agents. No story of a miraculous character can be too absurd to obtain credit with them, and a narrative is not the less eagerly listened to, nor the more cautiously received, because it is impossible in its circumstances. Within a few weeks after the deaths of the two malefactors, to whose horrible crimes were awarded equally horrible punishments, the forest that had been the scene of these bloody deeds was reported and believed to be visited at night by beings of unearthly make, whose groans and death struggles were heard in the darkest recesses of the woods, amidst the flapping of the wings of vultures and the fluttering of carrion crows and the dismal croaking of ravens. In the midst of this nocturnal din, the noise caused by tearing of the flesh from the bones was heard, and at the panting breath of the agonizing sufferer, quivering under the beaks of his tormentors as they consume his vitals, floating audibly upon the evening breeze. The murdered lady was also seen by moonlight near the spot where she had been dragged from her horse, wrapped in a blood-stained mantle overhung with gory and disheveled locks. Now they're afraid that the place is haunted. It says the little island in the swamp was said to present spectacles too horrid for human eyes to look upon, and sounds were heard to issue from it with no human ear could hear. Terrific and ghastly figures were seen to burst up at midnight amongst the evergreens that clad this lonely spot, emitting scents too suffocating and sickly to be endured, whilst demonic yells, shouts of despair, and groans of agony mingled their echoes in the solitude of the woods. Whilst I remained in this neighborhood, no colored person ever traveled this road alone after nightfall, and many white men would have ridden 10 miles round the country to avoid the passage of the Ridge Road after dark. Generations must pass away before the traditions of this place will be forgotten, and many a year will open and close before the last face will be pale, or the last heartbeat, as the twilight traveler skirts the borders of the murderer's swamp. Oh, it got renamed now. We had allowances of meat distributed to all the people twice this fall. Once we had finished saving the fodder, and again soon after the murder of the young lady. The first time we had beef, such as I had driven from the woods when I went to the alligator pond. But now we had 2 hogs given to us, which weighed 130 and the other 156 pounds. This was a very good pork, if there's such a thing, and I received 1.25 pounds as my share of it. This was the first pork that I had tasted in Carolina, and it afforded a real feast. We had in our family full 7 pounds of good fat meat, and as we now had plenty of sweet potatoes, both in our gardens and in our weekly allowance, we had on the Sunday following the funeral as good a dinner of stewed pork and potatoes, as could have been found in all Carolina. We did not eat all our meat on Sunday, but kept part of it until Tuesday, when we warmed it in a pot with an addition of parsley and other herbs, and had another very comfortable meal, he says. I had by this time become in some measure acquainted with the country and began to lay and execute plans to procure supplies of such things as were not allowed to me by my master. I understood various methods of entrapping raccoons and other wild animals that abounded in the large swamps of this country. And besides the skins which were worth something for their furs, I generally procured a many raccoons, opossums, and rabbits, as afforded us 2 or 3 meals in a week. They're eating bush meat. Wow. The woman with whom I lived understood the way of dressing a possum, and I was careful to provide one for our Sunday dinner every week. So long as these animals continued fat and in good condition. All the people on the plantation did not live as well as our family did, for many of the men did not understand trapping game, and others were too indolent to go far enough from home to find good places for setting their traps. My principal trapping ground was 3 miles from home, and I went 3 times a week, always after night, to bring home my game and keep my traps in good order. Many of the families in the quarter caught no game and had no meat, except that which we received from the overseer, which averaged about 6 or 7 meals in the year. So they only ate meat 6 or 7 times in the year. Sometimes it was unclean flesh. And he desired the meat so much he went to the forest to get this bush meat. Lydia, the woman whom I mentioned heretofore, was one of the women whose husband procured little or nothing for the sustenance of their families. And I often gave her a quarter of a raccoon or a small opossum, for which she appeared very thankful. Her health was not good, and she had a bad cough, and often told me she was feverish and restless at night. It appeared clear to me that this woman's constitution was broken by hardship and suffering, and she could not live long in her present mode of existence. Her husband, a native of a country far in the interior of Africa, said he had been a priest in his own nation, and he had never been taught to do any kind of labor, being supported by contributions of the public. Sounds like a Levite. And he now maintained as far as he could the same kind of lazy indignity that he had enjoyed at home. He was compelled by the overseer to work with other hands in the field, but as soon as he had come into his cabin, he took his seat and refused to give his wife the least assistance to do anything. She was consequently obliged to do the little work that it was necessary to perform in the cabin, and also to bear all the labor of weeding, cultivating the family patch or garden. The husband was a morose, sullen man, and said he formerly had 10 wives in his country, who all had to work for him and waited upon him, and he brought himself badly off here. And he thought himself badly off here in having but one woman to do anything for him. That's funny. This man was very irritable and often beat and otherwise maltreated his wife. That's not funny. On the slightest provocation, and the overseer refused to protect her on the grounds that he never interfered in the family quarrels of the black people. I pitied this woman greatly, but as it was not in my power to remove her from the presence and authority of her husband, I thought it prudent not to say nor do anything to provoke him further against her. As the winter approached and the autumnal rain set in, she was frequently exposed in the field and was wet for several hours together. This, joined to the want of warm and comfortable woolen clothes, caused her to contract colds and hoarseness, which increased the severity of her cough. A few days before their Christmas, her child died, and after an illness of only 3 days, I assisted her and her husband to inter the infant, which was a little boy, and his father buried with it a small bow and several arrows, a little bag of parched meal, a miniature canoe about a foot long, and a little paddle, with which he said it would cross the ocean to his own country, a small stick, an iron nail sharpened, fastened into one end of it, and a piece of white mousseline with several curious and strange figures painted on it in blue and red, by which he said his relations and countrymen would know the infant to be his son, and will receive it accordingly on its arrival amongst them. Okay, not like a Levite. Cruel as the man was to his wife, I could not but respect the sentiments which inspired his affection for his child, Though it was the affection of a barbarian, he cut a lock of hair from his head, threw it upon the dead infant, and closed the grave with his own hands. He then told us that the God of his country was looking at him and was pleased with what he had done. Thus ended the funeral service. As we returned home, Lydia told me she was rejoiced that was rejoiced. Wow. As we returned home, Lydia told me she was rejoiced that her child was dead, and out of a world in which slavery and wretchedness must have been its only portion. I am now, said she, ready to follow my child, and the sooner I go, the better for me. She went with us to the field until the month of January, when, as we were returning from our work one stormy and wet evening, she told me she would never pick any more cotton, that her strength was gone and she could work no more. When we assembled at the blowing of the horn on the following morning, Lydia did not appear. The overseer, who had always appeared to dislike this woman, when he missed her, swore very angrily and said he supposed she was pretending to be sick, but if she was, he would soon cure her. He then stepped into his house and took some copperas from a little bag and mixed it with water. I followed him to Lydia's coffin, where he compelled her to drink this solution of copperas. It caused her to vomit violently, and made her exceedingly sick. I think to this day that this act of the overseer was the most inhumane of all those that I have seen perpetuated upon defenseless slaves. For those who've just joined us, we are in chapter 10 of 50 Years in Chains. I don't know why I keep saying in slaves. Slika. Lydia was removed that same day to the sick room in a state of extreme debility and exhaustion. When she left this room again, she was a corpse. Her disease was a consumption of the lungs, which terminated her life early in March. I assisted in carrying her to the grave, which I closed up upon her and covered with green turf. She sleeps by the side of her infant in the corner of the Negro graveyard of this plantation. Death was to her a welcome messenger who came to remove her from toil that she could not support and from misery that she could not sustain. Christmas approached and we all expected 2 or 3 holidays, but we were disappointed as only one was all that was allotted to us. I went to the field and picked cotton all day, from which I was paid by the overseer. And at night I had a good dinner of stewed, why does he keep saying, I'm sorry. He had a dinner of stewed pork and sweet potatoes. Such was the beginning and end of his first Christmas on the cotton plantation. We went to work as usual the next morning and continued our labor through the week, as if Christmas had been stricken from the calendar. I had already saved and laid by a little more than $10 in money, but part of it had been given to me at the funeral. I was now but in want of clothes, none having been given me since I came here. I had, at the commencement of the cold weather, cut up my blanket, and the aid of Lydia, who was a good seamstress, converted it into a pair of trousers and a long roundabout jacket. But this deprived me of my bed, which was imperfectly supplied by mats, which I made of rushes. The mats were a comfortable thing to lie upon, but they were by no means equal to the blanket for covering. A report had been current among us for some time that there would be a distribution of clothes to the people on New Year's Day, but how much or what kind of clothes we were to get, no one pretended to know, except that they were to get shoes in conformity to a long established rule on the plantation. From Christmas to New Year appeared a long week to me, and I have no doubt that it appeared yet longer to some of my fellow slaves, most of whom were entirely barefoot. I had made moccasins for myself of the skins of squirrels that I had caught in my traps, and by this means protected my feet from the frost, which was sometimes very heavy and sharp in the morning. On the first day of January, when we met at the blowing of the morning horn, the overseer told us we must all proceed to the great house, where we were to receive our winter clothes, and surely no order was ever more willingly obeyed. When we arrived at the house, our master was up, and we were all called into great court in the front of the dwelling. The overseer now told us that shoes would be given to all those who were able to go into the field to pick cotton. This deprived of shoes the children and several old persons whose eyesight was not sufficiently clear to enable them to pick cotton. A new blanket was then given to everyone above 7 years of age. Children under 7 received no blanket, being left to provide for by their parents. Children of this age and under go entirely naked in the daytime and slept with their mothers at night, or are wrapped up together in such bedding as the mother may possess. It may well be supposed that in our society, although we were all slaves and all nominally in a condition of most perfect equality, yet there was in fact a very great difference in the manner of living in the several families. Indeed, I doubt if there is as great a diversity in the modes of life in the several families of a white village in North New York or Pennsylvania, containing a population of 300 people, as there were in the several households of our quarter. This may be illustrated by the following circumstance. Before I came to reside in the family with whom I lived at this time, they seldom tasted any food, they seldom tasted animal food or even fish except on meat days, as they were called. That is when meat was given to the people by the overseer, sorry, That is when meat was given to the people by the overseer under the orders of our master. The head of the family was a very quiet, worthy man, but slothful and inactive in his habits. When he had come from the field at night, he seldom thought of leaving the cabin again before morning. He would and did make baskets and mats and earned some money by these means, and also did his regular day's work on Sunday. But all his acquirements were not sufficient to enable him to provide any kind of meat for his family. All that his wife and children could do was to provide him with work at his baskets and mats, and they lived even then better than some of their neighbors. After I came among them and had acquired some knowledge of surrounding country, I made as many baskets and mats as he did. He liked being in competition, and took time to go twice a week to look at my traps. As the winter passed away and spring approached, the proceedings of my hunting began to diminish. The game became scarce, and both raccoons and possums grew poor and worthless. It was necessary for me to discover some new mode of improving the allowance allotted to me by the overseer. I had all my life been accustomed to fishing in Maryland, and I now resolved to resort to water for a living, the land having failed to furnish me a comfortable subsistence. With these views, I set out one Sunday morning early in February and went to the river at a distance of 3 miles from home. From the appearance of the stream, I felt confident that it must contain many fish, and I went immediately to work to make a weir, W-E-I-R. With the help of an axe that I had with me, I had finished before night the framework of a weir of pine sticks lashed together with white oak splits. I had no canoe, but made a raft of dry logs, upon which I went to suitable place in the river and set my weir. I afterwards made a small net of twine, and I bought at the store, and on next Thursday night I took as many fish from my weir as filled a half-bushel measure. This was a real treasure. It was the most fortunate circumstance that had happened with me since I came to the country. I was enabled to show my generosity, but like all mankind, even in my liberality, I kept myself in mind. I gave a large fish to the overseer and took 3 more to the great house. These were the first fresh fish that had been in the family this season, and I was much praised by my master and young mistress for my skill and success in fishing. But this was all the advantage I received from this effort to court the favor of the great. I did not even get a dram. The part I had performed in the detection of the murderers of the young lady was forgotten, or at least not mentioned now. I went away from the house not only disappointed, but chagrined, and thought with myself that if my master and young mistress had nothing but words to give me for my fish, we should not carry on very large traffic. For those who have just joined us, we are reading 50 Years in Chains, halfway through chapter 10. On next Sunday morning, a black boy came from the house and told me that our master wished to see me. The summons was not to be disobeyed. When I returned to the mansion, I went round to the kitchen and sent word by one of the house slaves that I had come. The servant returned and told me that I was to stay in the kitchen and get my breakfast, and after that to come into the house. A very good breakfast was sent to me from my master's table after the family had finished their morning meal. And when I had done with my repast, I went into the parlor. I was received with great affability by my master, who told me he had sent for me to know if I had been accustomed to fishing the place I had come from. I informed him that I had been employed at a fishery on the Patuxent every spring for several years, and that I thought I understood fishing with a seam as well as most people. He then asked me if I could knit a seam, to which I replied in the affirmative. After some other questions, he told me that as picking on cotton was nearly over this season and the fields must soon be plowed up for a new crop, he had thought of having a seam made and of placing me at the head of a fishing party for the purpose of trying to take a supply of fish for his hands. No communication could have been more unexpected than this, and it was almost as pleasing to me as it was unexpected by me. I now began to hope that there would be some respite from the labors of the cotton field, and that I should not be doomed to drag out a dull, monotonous existence within the confines of the enclosures of the plantation. Sorry, that one was a little wordy right there. In Maryland, the fishing season was always one of hard labor. It is true, but also a time of joy and hilarity. We then had throughout the time of fishing plenty of bread and at least bacon enough to fry our fish with. We also had a daily allowance of whiskey or brandy, and we always considered ourselves fortunate when we left the farm to go to the fishery. A few days after this, I was again sent for by my master, who told me that he had bought twine and ropes for a shine. I guess they're meaning a net, Seine, and that I must set to work and knit it as quickly as possible, that as he did not wish the twine to be taken to the quarter, I must remain with the servants in the kitchen and live with them while employed in constructing the sign. I was assisted in making the sign by a black boy who I taught to work with me, and by the end of 2 weeks, we had finished our job. While at work on this sign, I lived rather better than I formerly done when residing at the quarter. We received among us 12 in number, including the people who worked in the garden, the refuse of the master's table. In this way, we procured a little cold meat every day. And when there were many strangers visiting the family, we sometimes procured considerable quantities of cold and broken meats. My new employment afforded me a better opportunity than I had hitherto possessed of making correct observations upon the domestic economy of my master's household, and of learning the habits and modes of life of the person who composed it. On a great cotton plantation such as this of my master's, the field hands who lived in the quarter are removed so far from the domestic circle of their master's family by their servile condition and the nature of their employment, that they know but little more of the transactions within the walls of the great house than if they lived 10 miles off. Many a slave has been born, lived to old age, and died on a plantation without ever having been within the walls of his master's domicile. My master was a widower, and his house was in charge of his sister, a maiden lady apparently of 55 or 60. He had 6 children, 3 sons and 3 daughters, and all unmarried, but only one of the sons was at home at the time I came upon the estate. The other 2 were in some of the northern cities, the one studying medicine and the other at college. At the time of knitting the twine, these young gentlemen had returned on visits to their relations, and all the brothers and sisters were now on the place. The young ladies were all grown up and marriageable. Their father was known to be a man of great wealth, and girls were reputed very pretty in Carolina. One of them, the second of the 3, was esteemed a great beauty. Now he's starting to look at. All right, I'll save that for later. The reader might deem my young mistress' pretty face and graceful person altogether impertinent to the narrative of my own life, but they had a most material influence upon my fortunes and changed the whole tenure of my existence. Had she been less beautiful or of a temper less romantic and adventurous, I should still have been a slave in South Carolina, if yet alive, and the world would have been saved the labor of pursuing these pages. Anyone at all acquainted with Southern manners will at once see that my master's possessions attracted which would not fail to draw within a numerous visitors, and that the head of such a family as dwelt under its roof was not likely to be without friends. I had not been at work upon the sign a week before I discovered by listening to the conversation of my master and the other member of the family that they prided themselves not a little upon the antiquity of their home and the long practice of generous hospitality to strangers and to all respectable people who chose to visit their homestead. Last chapter. All circumstances seemed to conspire to render his house one of the chief seats of the fashion, the beauty, the wit, and the gallantry of South Carolina. Scarcely an evening came, but it brought a carriage and ladies and gentlemen and their servants, and every day brought dashing young planters mounted on horsebacks to dine with the family. But Sunday was the day of the week on which the house received the greatest accession of company. My master and family were members of the Episcopal Church and attended service every Sunday, when the weather was fine, at a church 8 miles distance. Each of my young masters and mistress had a saddle horse, and in pleasant weather they frequently all went to church on horseback, leaving my old master and mistress to occupy the family carriage alone. I had seen 15 or 20 young people come to my master for dinner on Sunday from church, and very often a young man of handsome appearance was among them. I had observed these things long before, but now I have come to live at the house and become more familiar with them. 3 Sundays intervened while I was at work upon the sign, and on each of these Sundays, more than 20 persons besides the families dined at my master's. During these 3 weeks, my young master were absent far the greater part of the time, but I observed that they generally came home on Sunday for dinner. My young mistress were not far from home much, and I believe they never left the plantation unless either their father or some of their brothers was with them. Dinner parties were frequent in many masters' house, and on these occasions of festivity, a black man who belonged to a neighboring estate and who played the violin was sent for. I observed that whenever this man was sent for, he knew and sometimes even came before night, which appeared a little singular to me, as I knew the difficulty that colored people had to encounter in leaving the estate to which they were attached. That is the reading of chapter 10. Interesting, into his mind. Don't know which way he's scheming right about now, but if anyone would like to say anything, feel free to do so. Let me see here. I didn't log in. If you're on the phone line and you would like to comment, feel free to do so. If you're listening to this on the replay, feel free to drop something in the box for us. And I also dropped something in the box for you, as I shared earlier before we read. But let me just go into a little bit about what we were reading for me. His mind is interesting. I can't really, the way he's describing everything, I don't know. He doesn't seem to hold on to situations long, just a minute ago. And I think this, for me, as I'm reading these narratives and these stories, we see the dichotomy or the split personalities or thinking of our people, because even though in this case, just a chapter before, his master and the rest of them sought to do him harm, and he was delivered from that, he still sees them as something to attain, something to strive for. He's still in amazement at the way in which they live. He still spoke highly of eating scraps off their table. So it's that duality that I'm seeing in his mind. That's just very interesting, and I would like to see where it goes from here. He even noted, I know you might be saying, why am I commenting on her beauty? If you remember in the beginning of the story, he was kidnapped from Maryland, taken from his children and wife. I haven't heard him since those chapters. It may be painful for him to recollect, but he's kind of like in the moment. He's not really reflecting, except for when he first met the family that he met. He's not really reflecting much on them. But I just thought it was just interesting how he refers to the other people, like in comparison, like he was in comparison on the cotton field. He compared himself again as to the other brother in the house who he's staying with. So in a kind of way, he's stating it, but in another kind of way, the tone of which he's expressing himself is a kind of way like, okay, I'm a little bit better than them. But I do like the way that he described that it was so it's stratified, if I could say that word, that even in the slave conditions, you had some slaves living worse. And we always hear about the house slaves versus the field slaves, but he's even going a step further to say amongst the field Negroes, there was a great division based on whatever the master didn't give you. Can you imagine getting one pair of shoes a day? Like, I went to go get my daughter some shoes, and children grow out of shoes like quickly. And can you imagine someone just allocating you in the dead of winter, January 1st? Okay, now I'll give you winter clothes. Like, it hasn't been cold this whole time. You have to cut your bedding up and make clothes, you know, and if you only have one pair of clothes, how are you bathing? How are you remaining clean, hygienic? All of these things really come to mind as you think about the narratives of the slaves. If anybody has anything to say, feel free to do so. Sister on the line, would you like to comment on what you heard? I'm not sure if she's on mute.
I don't have any comments at this time.
Thank you so much. That was the voice of Sister. She's taking it in. It's all good. That's the voice of Sister Angel. Definitely, I'm sure I will hear your feedback. It is a lot to take in. It's like, you know, something that's really rich. You ever ate something or some chocolate or something and it's so rich, you're like, oh man, let me get a minute, let me get some water. You know, you really can't process it. I think because I've just been in this mode of reading a lot of different narratives, now I'm just going in there with a fine-tooth comb and just looking at the whole landscape and trying to see really how it's still present today amongst us. Some of these behaviors, some of these mannerisms, some of these thought processes. For me, it's beautiful because we're actually in his head. And that's the thing about books, especially autobiographies and biography, things of this nature. You get to be in the mind of the individual and really see things from their perspective and kind of get an understanding that we wouldn't otherwise else have. So it is something that takes patience. I thank everybody for tuning in. You know, I don't have no crazy visuals and all the stuff that overstimulate us today. It's just good old fashioned reading. So once again, if you came in later on, I wanted to share again, congratulations. Like I said, the link is in the box. We made, when I say we, because I'm not, you know, I can read at home. You know, I just think it's beautiful to do it collectively and grow collectively. So that's why I say we made the front page of today's paper as it relates to using social media, which is what we're doing. We're using social media. It says civil rights message shifts to social media for a generation. We're using social media to get the word out while other people, it says here, that is more accustomed to smartphones than bullhorns. Back in the day, they used to go on the bullhorn and attention. Now we can sit down at our computer and we can have this conversation on the conference line. We can have this conversation on live stream for free, as long as you pay your cable bill. But nonetheless, you know, you come on here for free and you can have this conversation, and that I see is not really being had. And so it's a beautiful thing. And I thank the brother Jeff Gallup, who saw that it had some value, as we very much know, and shared it. So definitely share this project if you haven't already. Let someone know how it has helped you. And basically, like I said before, you can do it wherever you are, whatever group you are. Pick a book and read it together and then talk about it. So until next time, my name is Imuna Yisrael. This has been the Lift Every Voice, the LEV Project, reading the narratives of our foreparents who came before us not that long ago. This was like 18 something, so 100 and something years ago. Yeah. So we're halfway through the book. It's getting interesting. I think he escapes. Don't know how he did it yet. I didn't read ahead. And so we're going to see it. But until next time, thank you once again and have a blessed night. Peace.